Chapter 8. Okay. So, 1 second. Chapter 8. Okay, I mixed up. Okay. All right, so this is still before that
Should we
subject.
say a
Okay.
prayer that this hostage deal works out?
You know, we should say a prayer that God should release the hostages without any deals. That's really what we should say, because it's quite a confusing deal and quite a controversial deal.
And there are different versions of it.
Yeah, it's quite controversial. I was researching the halachic, what you do in hostages, and it's really not simple. It's very important not to play on emotions when you're following Jewish law, and not to play. So we hope that, we pray that the hostages are freed before any deal. That's the real truth, because it's, in a certain sense, it's a lose-lose situation. So yeah, that's
It's a huge deal. As the Times of Israel has a daily podcast briefing that summarizes the events of the day. And they have it every day. So I was down in the shop sanding, and I listened to the podcast while I'm doing that. I Bluetooth thing.
Absolutely.
And it's a huge, huge thing because there was a soldier, Shalik, something like that,
Gilad Shalit in 2011.
who they gave up like 1,000 prisoners for. And everyone in Israel knows that was a mistake. And because it incentivizes hostages. So this one is hugely sensitive.
It's extremely sensitive, and the Rebbe once spoke about hostage several times. So I was researching, and there were several times where the Rebbe said, well, more than once the Rebbe said that in Israel they're not following Jewish law, and they're not even following. A lot of times they're not even following war laws, the war rules of how to calculate war rules, and it's quite a sensitive thing. So I haven't found. I mean, it's quite complicated. But anyways, yeah, we hope that everyone can be freed without any ceasefire. That's really, that's really what we're praying for. Okay, if you say to a lady, you are betrothed to me with this cup of wine, right? So you give it to her, and inside there's honey, or this cup of honey. You give it to her, and
Instead of wine?
instead of honey, there's wine. This amount of silver, and you find that it's gold. With this amount of gold, you find it's silver. On Kiddush, I'm a Kohen, I'm a Levi. Kiddush, I'm a Levi, I find that I'm a Kohen. I am a Nasin, is a type of person who we don't know who his father is. Comes out, he's actually a mamzer. We find that he's a Nasin. I live in a big city, and you find out he lives in a small city. Small city, you find out he lives in a big city. On the condition that I'm rich, find out he's poor. Poor, they find out he's rich. On condition that I live close to the bathhouse, find out he lives far. Far, you find out he lives close. On the condition I have a daughter, or a servant, or a baker, or all these things, and he doesn't have them. On condition that he doesn't have, and he does have, a condition that he has wife and children, and he doesn't have, a condition that he doesn't have, and he doesn't have, and he does have a wife and children. And all these things, he's not married. Because he tricked her, right? It's not true what he said. His condition isn't true. So he's not married. And all of them, even if she says, I would do it even if you would say that, right? Even if she would say that, or if she would say, even if I knew you were tricking me, I wouldn't get married to you. She's not married. And it doesn't matter if she feels that way. If she feels that way in her heart, that doesn't matter. If she says it, though, let's see. Okay, if he says it on condition, okay. But if she says it, it implies that she could say, "Hey, I don't care if this is gold or silver." Then that might be married. Okay. If she says you're married to me, yeah.
So what's the bottom line here? Is she married or not?
She's not. She's not married.
Okay.
Even though she says, "Oh, I don't really care," right? I don't really care. She's not married. Okay. On condition that I make perfumes, and finds out that he also works in a leather house. On condition that I live in a city, and you find out that he has 2 homes. On condition that my name is Yosef, and it finds that his name is Yosef Shimon. They are married. So if what he said is true, even though there is more information, they are married. However, if he says to her on condition that my name is only Yosef, and it comes out he has two names, Yosef and Shimon, that I'm only do perfume, and turns out he also works in leather, that I only live in the big city, it turns out he lives in a small town also, then he is not married. If he says, you're married to me on condition that I know how to read, what does that mean? He needs to be able to read the Torah and translate it with the translation of Onkelos, the proselyte. If he says, says, She'ani Kara'a, that I am well read, he needs to know how to read Torah, Nevi'im, Kesuvim very well. So, right, the difference between able to read or being well read. On condition that I know to study Torah, he needs to know how to study Mishnah. Condition that I know how to study Talmud, right? So he needs to study, that I'm a Torah scholar, he needs to be able to read the Mishnah and these books of Midrash and the Tosefta Rav Yechiya. On condition that I am Talmud, then we don't say he has to be like the great rabbis, Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, but if he could tell him, if he knows a lot of the laws of the Talmud, then that's enough. When you get close to the holidays, he knows the laws of the holiday. In addition that I am a wise person, we don't say he has to be like Rabbi Akiva, but he has to be able to say, he has to be quite knowledgeable. On condition that I'm very strong, we don't say he has to be like Avner ben Ner and like Yoav, which are famous people, are very strong. Just anyone who looks at him and says, okay, this guy's strong, his friends think he's strong, and that's considered strong. On condition that I'm rich, we don't say he has to be like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that was extremely wealthy, a rabbi was extremely wealthy in the times of Talmud. But if he's honored for being wealthy, then he's considered wealthy. On condition that I am a tzaddik, that I am righteous. Even if he is absolutely wicked, they are married out of doubt, because if you do teshuvah, it is in your mind, if you repent in your mind, it just takes a second, and now you don't have any more sins. God wipes away your sins. So on condition that I'm wicked, even if he's a tzaddik gomer, he's married, because even if you're really righteous, if you think about idolatry in your mind for 1 second, you become wicked. You become a rasha. Because avodah zarah is very bad, and if you think about it, the Torah says, "Pen yifta levavchem," maybe your heart will go after idolatry. So even if someone says, on condition that I'm wicked, even if they're extremely righteous, they are married out of doubt because we don't know what is going on in his mind, but he does have the potential of becoming wicked in 1 second. Someone who says, I got married to her, I thought that she was a Kohenet, but really she's a Leviah. Now, there's advantages for a lady to be a Kohenet, and there's advantages for her to be a Leviah. The Kohenet is holier, and she'll get more tax stuff, but at the same time, she has to, the Kohen is more strict. The merits come with more obligations, and vice versa. So Leviah may be less obligations, but also less merit. So anyways, so he says that, and she's one or the other. She's not the one that he thought. On condition, I thought that she was. So he didn't say a condition. He says, I thought she was poor. She's rich, she's poor. He's married because she did not trick him. That was all in his mind, right? That was all in his mind. Similarly, if she says, I thought he was a Kohen and he's a Levi, or a Levi is a Kohen, or he's rich and he's poor, or he's poor and he's rich, she's married because he did not mistake her, he didn't mislead her, didn't misguide her. So, we see that, if she really wants to marry a Kohen, she better do her research before they get married, right? Because if they get married and she did not specify that she wanted to be a Kohen and she's unaware, then she cannot say, she cannot say, if I would have known, I wouldn't have got married.
So
she can say that, but it
couldn't
doesn't
you
happen.
just say something to the effect of, if he deceived her, either during the statement of that, and that would cover all the different.
Well, as we saw, there are times where he deceives her slightly, and that doesn't cover it, right? If he says, my name is this, and he has two names, right? And there are times where he fully deceives her. So he fully deceives her. We want to go through all these examples. Obviously, the opportunities for deception are much more vast than this. But we are going to know that complete deception. So let's say he comes and he's wearing a Rolex watch, right? And he says, get married. She says, I want to get married because he's rich. That's not deception, right? And he's poor, and that's all he has. Or it's fake Rolex, right? That's not deception. If he says, I have many Rolexes, and he lies, or if he says on condition that I'm rich. Now, we also went through the laws. We said, what if he's not really wealthy, but he's upper middle class, right? So upper middle class, we said, that isn't deception. So that's why the Rambam is going through these things. There's a line of deception. Really, you should not marry people conditionally. I feel like, as we see, if he doesn't specify or she doesn't specify the worry of deception, it's not considered deception. So really, before someone gets engaged, they should do all their due diligence and make sure there's nothing that would cause them not to want to get married. The common example nowadays, I think, in the world where these laws are applicable, are with mental health. Mental health is something which there's a very fine line between mentally healthy and not mentally healthy. In other words, it's not always like what people think, that it's like, your chemicals are all wrong. It's oftentimes not like that. It's often people go through traumatic experiences. They potentially could go through traumatic experiences. So things might come up later in life, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of people who are diagnosed with something and then they come out of it, whatever it is. So a lot of times nowadays these questions might come out that someone will get engaged and they'll be like, oh, they didn't know the person had a mental health history. This is where it gets gray area. My person say, well, it's not really mental health. I just lost my job and I had a hard time. Whatever it is, and it depends which doctors you ask and everything like that. But that's why it's so important to do due diligence. And
I need where is that? Where's the papers?
There's somewhere here. I don't know. I can't find it now. I'll find them after. So that's why it's so important to be open before you're married and give all the disclosures. And even still, you might not give enough because you might not know something you might not care about, might be something the other person cares about. But it's important to be open and careful before you pull the trigger because of all these things. Now, again, like halachically, if you do not intend to deceive, you probably won't deceive, right? You don't. But let's say you thought it was wine and it was really honey. Let's say you didn't know. You didn't know the difference between beer and wine, and you said.
Or you get old like me and you sometimes say the wrong thing and don't.
Correct. So yeah, these are.
That kind of stuff.
Well, so these are now, assuming that you, if you have two witnesses there, hopefully they'll help you out and everything, and a rabbi. But yeah, these things are not as relevant nowadays because when we make a wedding, we do it with a minyan. We do it in a public. But these laws are quite applicable. In particular, I think with like things like mental health and stuff like that. Sometimes you might have someone really wealthy who has a lot of debts. Or things that these can get complicated with these details. Okay, so we're holding on chapter 35 in the Tanya, and we are right after what's called the Haggah. The Haggah is the shaded area. It's almost like a footnote. There are very few footnotes that the Alter Rebbe writes in the Tanya, but there's a few of them to explain different things. But what we were explaining this chapter is we were talking about we haven't studied in a while, so I'll just summarize quickly. We said the Alter Rebbe was talking about a Beinoni. A Beinoni is somebody who has basically accomplished human perfection. Although in the Tanya, he is not a tzaddik, he is someone who has totally taken control of his mind, his thoughts, speech, and actions, and he's acting and thinking God-centered. Right? He doesn't not acting out of self-interest at all. Now this Beinoni, we said, he might get frustrated because he feels like he's living as a Beinoni and he's really exerting himself. I'm actually reading a book to my family now before they go to sleep about a certain chassid, and it says that he was a Beinoni, and you can see his life was on full holy exertion constantly. So the Alter Rebbe says, I'm going to comfort Beinonim, people like this, who they feel like inside they're still they haven't really transformed their emotions and their drives. They haven't really transformed their drives, their emotions. Their mind, if it was up to their mind, it would still think about, and their heart, it would still think about whatever it thought about, even after dozens of years. So he said, I want to comfort that person. So in order to comfort that person, the Alter Rebbe went to a mashal, he went to a parable. And the parable, it says in the Zohar that a chacham, they asked the child to say a verse. The child said a verse from Proverbs which said, "The chacham eina b'roshai." A wise person, his eyes are in his head. So the Zohar says, what do you mean? Where else would your eyes be? So the Zohar explains, the verse is saying that his eyes are looking up. What are they looking up? They're looking up to the flame that's on his head. What is the flame? The flame is the godly soul, which resides on our head when we do Torah mitzvahs. So we said, what a wise person, he's always centered, he's always focused on his purpose and what God needs from him and the Torah mitzvahs that God needs from him. Then we went into detail and we said that a person is like a wick, right? In other words, we don't necessarily, as a body, we don't have innate holiness. We are like, this is like the Kabbalah class. Our animal soul is kind of like the broken vessels. It's disconnected with the energy which created it and which gave it life. And that's why as humans, we kind of naturally were born and we're like, hey, what are we doing here? We're always trying to figure out what we're doing here. So a wise person always knows that he has to bring down the infinite light of God into his body, the flame. He has to be lit. So we said he's like the wick, and what is the fuel which brings God's infinite energy into him? It is the Torah and mitzvahs. And we said even a perfectly righteous person has to do that, because there's an endless amount, when you're talking about getting close to infinite God, there's an infinite and endless amount of how close you can get. So it's a constant service of God. And when we do mitzvahs, okay, let's go on. Sorry about that. So that's Esther Bash. So, her, she's been flying around the country to Chabad houses, and she has like a packed schedule. She's 95 years old, and her daughter fell badly and broke her arm. So she had to cancel all her speeches this week, which has been difficult, because she doesn't want to leave her daughter when her daughter has to, has to get surgeries. She broke both arms. So, anyways, let's go on.
How old is her daughter?
My daughter was probably 70s, yeah, it's been stressful for her and for the Chabad houses, because when you get a Holocaust survivor on that caliber to come, I mean, you're talking about 1,000 people crowds. You're comparing, yeah. Anyways, when a person, what's kind of neat is yesterday a rabbi in Florida sent me a picture of somebody with Esther Bash in the hospital, and he said, that's my sister. I didn't know she moved to Prescott. She's a nurse over there. I mean, she's just here for a little bit, but that's kind of a small world. Okay, a friend of mine. This rabbi is actually a friend of mine from many years ago. Okay, so anyways, so we explained further. We said that's what mitzvahs are. Mitzvahs are channels of infinite godly energy in the world. So when you do a mitzvah, you're channeling, and you can't see it now, but when Mashiach comes, we'll be able to see it. We can somewhat experience it. When we do a mitzvah, we release the infinite godly energy into the world and into our souls and into our bodies. So that's what a mitzvah is. And where we're going to go here is probably, we'll see where we're going to go, but the Alter Rebbe is going to say that essentially even the Beinoni, even he hasn't transformed his emotions, his negative traits, he's taking control of them, and he's doing mitzvahs. And that's more important than his own personal transformation. Okay, so now we're holding Vihine, when a person studies Torah. So when we go to the beginning of the Tanya, which we're probably going to go pretty soon to the beginning of the Tanya, I actually would love to go after Yutas Kislev, which is in about 10 days. We're going to see that basically the way it works is like this. You have a body, right? You have thought, speech, and action. You have emotive and intellect, right? And then you have the godly soul and the animal soul. And when you study Torah, what you're doing is you're activating your godly intellect in your body. When you do a mitzvah, you're activating your godly energy. When you think about yourself, and again, we'll talk about later, in the Alter Rebbe, self-interest is really selfish. It leads to selfishness. Ultimately, the reason why you need to eat is for God. Everything you do is for God. But when you act in self-interest, what you're doing is you're taking your animal soul and you're investing it in your body. It's taking over your body. So there's a battle. Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson is a famous speaker, but one of his most famous articles is A Tale of Two Souls. That's, he has it is somewhat of an interesting battle. So, when a person studies Torah, so now, his soul, his divine soul with its two inner garments, the faculties of speech and thought, right? He's taking the godly, he's taking his thought and speech and investing it with God, right? And the godly soul feels so good. He's pumping in energy from godliness, from his godly soul, the Shekhinah. As the rabbis say, this is what it says. The rabbis say that when two people are studying Torah, the Talmud says, the Shekhinah resides in them. Right? The Shekhinah resides in them. So, even one person who's studying Torah, he's drawing the Shekhinah. So you have like your intellect, which knows stuff, but then when you actually study Torah, you're activating it. You're activating godly Shekhinah. Rest upon the divine soul and upon the faculties of thought and speech, which are engaged in the mental and oral study of the Torah. However, in order to draw the light of the Shekhinah upon his body and animal soul as well, upon the vitalizing soul actually clothed in the body, if you want to actually bring the godly Shekhinah into your body, well, you got to do mitzvahs. You got to do mitzvahs in action with your body. If you're only studying Torah, you're only revealing the godly energy, the Shekhinah, in a mental level and a speech level. But if you want to bring it all the way, you got to do mitzvahs of action. Now your body, the actual power of the body, engaged in this act. So here he brings an example in this Tanya. When one dons tefillin, it is a physical strength in his arm that impels the motion of fulfillment of the mitzvah. So it is absorbed with divine light and will and emerges with perfect unity. So when you put tefillin on, you are investing. So if you think tefillin and speak tefillin, you're investing in thought and speech. But when you put tefillin, you're actually investing the Shekhinah, the infinite energy of God, into your arm. And this is the third garment, as mentioned all the way chapter 4. We have thought, speech, and action. Now the animal soul. The animal soul is also has two names. It's also called the vitalizing soul. Because when we talk about, everybody can see that people have souls, right? Because when you die, something goes away. And something was there before, and something goes away, right? So the vitalizing soul, so irregardless, we're talking about the animal soul, how self-interested it is, but when you do a physical mitzvah, he's now soaking in godly, infinite godly energy.
The animal soul.
The animal soul. So at this moment, he's totally living it up spiritually. Physically, I don't know. Because the animal soul is the one doing the mitzvah, and the body is the one doing the mitzvah. So he's actually fully absorbed in godly energy. If not for that mitzvah, the godly soul would not really be able to affect the animal soul, because the godly soul is spiritual.
In that moment.
Well, in general, the godly soul is spiritual. The animal soul is physically oriented. He's self-oriented. So it's like a lot of times we feel like, the best thing we can do is we believe in something. But really what it's saying here is, when you believe in something, it's not really so transformative for your animal soul. It's like a lot of times you can believe in one thing and do something totally different, right? But when you actually do a mitzvah, now you're investing the Shekhinah on your body. Your body is absorbing the Shekhinah, is connecting to God in the deepest way. So, the intermediary between them is the vitalizing animal soul clothed in the man's blood, which is in the heart and throughout the body. The nature of the animal soul is such that the coarsest, the most material level of its spiritual substance is capable of clothing itself within the blood. Since the animal soul is the divine soul's medium affecting the body, its active power is also absorbed into holiness when one performs a mitzvah. Okay, so now we'll go to the flip side. But your animal soul has a physical side and a spiritual side, right? The more invested in action it is, the more material it is. But it has a spiritual side. So when you go and you get your animal soul to do a mitzvah, you are really letting the animal soul listen to God and bring the Shekhinah all the way to the lowest physical part of your animal soul. That's why mitzvahs are so important. And that's why there is a huge emphasis on mitzvahs in the Torah. The Torah actually says, the Jewish law says, the action's the main thing. So if you think the thought or talk the talk, that is not as important as the actual mitzvah. Because when you do the mitzvah, you're consuming your whole being with God, to the lowest parts of your being. Now we're going to go to the other side. All right.
But what's the net effect of affecting your animal soul in that way? What's happening?
Well, so when you do a mitzvah, you are bringing yourself close to God. You're bringing yourself close to God, and you're bringing God into you and into the world. You're fulfilling, that's your purpose. You're creating a deeper relationship with God. So your godly soul, when you do a mitzvah in action, your godly soul is getting like oxygen. He's like, because he's battling, really if it was up to him, the godly soul, the animal soul would totally be godly just like him. The godly soul is speaking to the animal soul and you say, hello, you have a purpose. It's not about you, it's about God. Why are you thinking so much about yourself? Animal soul doesn't really get it so well. So now we're going to talk about, but when you do a mitzvah, don't undervalue the fact that you are totally connecting your animal soul and your body with God. You are totally being a conduit for godly energy in the world. Now, here's the flip side. Although the substance and the essence of the animal soul in the heart, the evil midas, the evil emotional character, have still not been absorbed into holiness. So in chapter 12 in the Tanya, going back, it says only tzaddikim have full control of their emotions. And their emotions reflect holiness. In others, the animal soul garments, the lower part connects to holiness. But the deeper part, the midos, the animal soul's essence, his personality does not. Right? Nevertheless, this fact does not prevent the Shekhinah from coming down. So someone might say, all the time people say, this mitzvah, I'll do it, but I don't mean it. I don't really care about it. Right? So, if I don't really care about it, should I do the mitzvah? So this is what the Alter Rebbe is addressing now. For a tzaddik, a righteous person, he's totally present in the mitzvah. A regular person, they might even say, I like this mitzvah, but tomorrow I don't like that mitzvah. I'm not going to do that mitzvah, right? So really we should do every mitzvah. But he's saying even though the mahus is actually what it is. So, in the Kabbalah class, we talk about you have a biyah, which is thought, speech, and action, and then you have, which are garments, and then you have the 10 sefirot, and you have the 10 sefirot of the animal soul. They want what they want. They're conditioned to want what they want, to feel good when they feel good. They're conditioned to what they want. So now someone will say, I'm doing this mitzvah, but I still care more about physical things, right? Because they are subjugated to the holiness, and against their will they say Amen, and they agree ultimately when a person does a mitzvah, their personality is involved in the mitzvah, through strengthening the divine soul. So now while you're doing the mitzvah, even though your self-interest might not be so interested in the mitzvah, and there are certain mitzvahs where our self-interest is interested in the mitzvah, our animal soul is interested in the mitzvah, right? So those might not be our best mitzvahs. From our perspective, they're our best mitzvahs. But from the godly soul, those might not be our best mitzvahs. So now, say you take a mitzvah you really don't want to do, and you do it. And now you're forcing, the godly soul is forcing the animal soul to be involved in this mitzvah. So since you're doing the mitzvah ultimately, and your animal soul is taking the time off of its usual endeavors to do the mitzvah, while you're doing the mitzvah, it doesn't withhold God from entering you. The energy, the power of the animal soul in the mitzvah, it is totally now merged with God in perfect unity. Thereby one draws down a ray of light upon the totality of the animal soul through the body and the entire body. The mitzvah powerfully surrounds him. That's why the Zohar says, it says the Shekhinah resides on the head. It encompasses you from the head. And similarly vein, it says, whenever you have 10 people, the divine presence resides on them. It doesn't necessarily permeate us fully, but it's on top of us. So in the notes here, the Rebbe notes, when do we wear a yarmulke in Jewish law? It says you're not supposed to go 6 feet with a uncovered head. So when do we wear a yarmulke? So now the Shekhinah, we always remind ourselves, the Shekhinah is on top of us. Okay, and this is what it says. Okay, so various levels of rest in the Shekhinah have been discussed. As it rests upon our divine soul, when we do a mitzvah, upon an animal soul as a whole, upon the body, as to the light of the Shekhinah encompassed in the body, within this level we find further some divisions. The level which is an effect of a mitzvah. So the Alter of God now is to state that the variety of levels becomes manifest doesn't indicate any change in plurality in the light of God. So now, if we mentioned, we said when you study Torah, the Shekhinah resides on you. And when you do a mitzvah, you're one with the God, right? Now, if you look in the Talmud there, it says, we studied this actually in Brachis on page 6. It says, the Shekhinah resides on 10 people. Not only that, but even on 3 people. And even on 2 people. And even 1 person, the Shekhinah resides on him when he's doing a mitzvah, right? And even 1 person, the Shekhinah resides, and even when you're not doing a mitzvah also, the Shekhinah is residing on you. So what exactly does that mean? So here's what the Alter was going to say. Now, what we're going to say is it's always the same God, the same Shekhinah. It's always the same God, the same Shekhinah. So when we connect to a mitzvah, we're always fully connecting to God while we do the mitzvah. But what is the difference? When we talk about God, the Ein Sof is everywhere. It is only that He concealed from His creatures. Thus, the uniqueness of the manifestation of the Shekhinah lies in the revelation of the Ein Sof. Can be construed as a change in Himself or plurality. It is not. One second. None of the various forms, let's read this here, it's actually interesting, in the translation of this Tanya has like 3 lines at a time, so they actually you need to read 2 of them together. None of these various forms in which the light of the Shekhinah is manifested, meaning the ways in which the Ein Sof is revealed, can be construed as a change in himself or as plurality. The fact that the Shekhinah manifests itself at some point in one soul through performing a mitzvah, whereas it had previously not been manifest, does not point any change in God. Kedisa Sanhedrin, as it says in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Amr le'ahu mina l'Rabban Gamliel. This is quite a famous expert in the Talmud. This heretic said to Rabban Gamliel, who was one of the leaders of the Jewish people at the times of the Talmud, Amrisai kol be'asar shchinta sharya, kama shchinta isvu. You say that the Shekhinah rests on every assembly of 10. How many Shekhinahs are there, right? So if you have 10 people, and the Shekhinah resides on them, that's like a separate God, right? How many Shekhinahs are there? Rabbi Gamliel said, no. God is everywhere. There's one Shekhinah, one God. Why do we say 10 people have a Shekhinah? It's like, imagine you have a house with a bunch of windows. The world is like a house, right? Which blocks out the sunlight. It's dark. You let in a window, right? You let in a window. So what happens is, you let in the window. What happens is the light comes in, right? You let it in a bigger window, more windows, a skylight, but it's the same God, it's the same light. What you're doing is you're removing the barrier which blocks it. So it's the same thing here, Bamaskal Yavin, it's the same thing saying, we'll finish, the Alter Rebbe says, so with various modes, the light of the Shekhinah is manifested. The light remains the same without change. The difference is how we receive it. So what the Alter Rebbe is building here is he's saying that there's one God, the infinite one God, and when we do a mitzvah or any degree of Shekhinah is essentially us letting the same God into the world. Now what the Alter Rebbe is going to build up here is going to build up and say, it's true that you don't necessarily, in our lifetime, until Mashiach comes, our internal build-up and personality may never fully be changed. However, we're still bringing God into the world. We're still fully bringing in. We're doing what God wants. So, really, there's something deeper that the Alter Rebbe is going to be saying here. We, a lot of times, we might have a mitzvah we struggle with, or we might have a lot of struggles, or we may struggle with trusting God, faith in God, all these different things, and we want to totally transform that and no longer struggle, right? But from God's perspective, what the Alter Rebbe is saying, is he's saying, you are not necessarily meant to transform. You're meant to bring God into the world. And that you're doing. You're bringing God into the world, and you're connecting with God, and you're bringing God into the world. It's not underneath, and what the Alter Rebbe is going to bring up to the next chapter, is the mitzvah is not really about your benefit. So some people might say, hey, I want to be a good Jew, and I just can't seem to overcome this mitzvah, this challenge, or whatever it is. Right? I want to be a good Jew. And what the Alter Rebbe is saying is, on one hand, he's saying you can still connect to God, but he's saying something deeper. He's saying not necessarily is it about you overcoming your challenge. It might be you just bringing God and doing mitzvahs in the world. So that's what and this is very Chabad philosophy. And then the next chapter, which is going to be the final chapter of our cycle here,
It's not for yourself.
It's not for yourself, it's for God. So in other words, you are doing the mitzvah, you're doing it for God, and you're bringing God fully into the world. So don't calculate. So what the Alter Rebbe is eventually going to build up is he's saying, stop calculating so much if you're righteous or not, if you mean it or don't mean it. Because that is ultimately not necessarily up to you. What you have to calculate is, you're like a soldier. It's like a soldier, if you're at war in Gaza, do I mean it? Do I not mean it? Do I care? Do I not care? It's like, no. Protect the country. Do what you need to do, because you are actually being a fundamental part now. You are actually being a fundamental part of what God wants from you. You are doing what God wants for you. Now, when Mashiach comes, all the barriers of our heart will be removed, and all our self-interest will be removed. We won't have any self-interest anymore. We'll totally be in it for God, and we'll totally be related to God.
You're not going to lose my car?
No, you'll be able to appreciate how your car is really for God. Yeah. So that's really what it is, and that's what we're supposed to do now. So sometimes our cars break down, and we're so angry our car break down. I just fixed it. I just brought it to the shop. I just this and that. But what this can accomplish is maybe God. Maybe if you ask God, God would say, I want you to bring your car in because there's a Jewish guy there you'll meet. Or your car is done its max potential, I want you to go bring God into another car.
So when Mashiach comes, what happens to our animal soul? If we're going to lose all of our self-centered
So
tendencies?
if you can imagine, let's say in the class on Monday, when Mashiach, we will lose our self-interest. Our self-interest, you see, we're programmed as humans to think like our survival, our self-interest is the default, right? And then there's some religion things, that may help us or not help us. The reality is the default is totally God, and our animal soul is like kalim. It's vessels which don't feel the light that it comes from. They don't feel the godly energy. So when Mashiach comes, our animal soul will once again experience the godly energy that it comes from. It will realize, like, wow, we really actually come from God, and that's all we want to do. That's all we want to do. It's interesting, but like what we see throughout history is when we follow God's ways, the Jewish people follow God's ways, there's no greater key to survival than following God's ways. No greater key to survival than doing Torah mitzvahs. That's what we see more and more in these days. When we do Torah, in the end of the day, in the short run, sometimes we feel like we're not going to survive when we do Torah mitzvahs and stuff like that. But in the long run, in the bigger picture of history, our Jewish continuity totally comes from following God's ways. So when Mashiach comes, what will be significant? The battle will be over. There will be no more battle. We won't battle against the godly voice, against the animal soul. We'll be totally unified with it. The animal soul will be free of the wrong perspective. And what basically will happen? Actually, the next class is all about the concealment of God. There will be no more concealment of God. God will be fully revealed. So now when we do a mitzvah, it won't be like, wow, we're doing this great favor for God. We're investing our energy, which could have been invested here, over here. We will see our energy as a means of something which is used for God, right? So one of the rabbis once said, he said, when Mashiach comes, we might look back and say, boy, I wish I would have fought harder. I didn't realize